Today we're tier ranking the 25 most popular interview questions. If you've ever walked into an interview and felt completely blindsided by the questions, please don't worry because we're gonna make sure that this doesn't happen again. I'm Millie, I'm a career and mindset coach and also a tech recruiter. And after doing hundreds of interviews, I know exactly what questions get asked the most. I also used the article from Indeed.com with the 20 most popular questions for 2024. And so I've combined my own experience with those questions to bring you those 25 most common questions. And today, I'm not just going to rank those questions, but I'm also going to share with you practical strategies and tips for answering each and every one of them from a recruiter's perspective, so you can never fail your interview again. So as you can see, I have set up in here all of my categories, and it starts with easy peasy lemon squeezy. This one I think is self-explanatory, just very easy questions. The next one is the brain busters. So those are ones that definitely need a little bit of prep, but you should be able to answer without too much difficulty. Then we have sweaty palms, and those are the questions that you may not have a proper answer for, you may not have that experience, and so it's a little bit more about just making sure that you have thought about them. Next, we have heart racing, and those are the questions that you kind of don't want to be asked because you probably don't have an example or you maybe didn't deal with the situation very well. And so you need to know how to present certain things in a flattering way. And finally, we have call for backup, and those are the questions that might trip you. And so I want to make sure that you know how to handle them. Let's get into it. So we are starting with a doozy, stakeholders with conflicting priorities. And by the way, the colors don't matter at all. It's just I wanted to avoid having 25 identical squares. Probably I would put it in sweaty palms because you might not have that much experience with conflict resolution. And so if you don't have that, definitely think what your approach would be. Why would people have conflicting priorities? How would you mediate between them? Here, it's all about communication and reaching some sort of compromise. So it's about communication skills, really. Received negative feedback. Probably in the heart racing one. Now, this question can really be super helpful and put you in a good light as someone that learns from their mistakes. But in here, make sure that you pick feedback on something that you have actually fixed or you're nearly fixed. Because if you've received feedback on your performance in the last 2 months and you haven't changed anything, this is not going to be a good question, and it can make the interviewer actually doubt whether you're going to be good for the job. Fallen behind on a task with tight deadline. Probably I would put it in here in sweaty palms because you might not have had that experience. You might be super organized. And in this case, it's like, what do I say? Because I just don't fall behind, which isn't great. So you can start with that and then say what your approach would be if you haven't had that. But I think in here, it's important for people to see, when do you seek help? Like, do you spend 10 days doing research and then no one knows that you're stuck? Or do you maybe spend a day trying to find a solution? And if you can't, then you let your manager or teammates know so they can actually support you, right? Like, we don't want people to be waiting for ages before they admit that something is not working or they're going to be late. And it's also about kind of, do you ask maybe for more time, more resources? How do you communicate with the client if you're directly in touch with them? So there is a lot of things. Actually, I'll put this one in the heart racing category because I think it's quite a challenging question to answer. Work with a team to achieve a common goal. I think this one is a brain buster. So it's a relatively simple question that most of us should have an answer to, unless you've worked your entire career as a freelancer completely on your own. And even in that case, you could probably kind of work with the client and use that as an example. But the goal here is to literally communicate and talk about teamwork. And how do you maybe communicate with colleagues who have different level of knowledge? Maybe you're in tech and you work with the marketing team who are not techie. Maybe you work with the client side of the team. And so you have a little bit more communication with a team that you don't know very well. So it's all about adjusting your communication. How do you track project deadlines, success, metrics? all of that. So this is a really great question that I think you can prepare for. It's very likely made a mistake at work, probably in the heart racing one as well. So the worst thing you can say here is that you never make mistakes, because I think that everyone has made a mistake. Now, the key in here, if you can, is to think about a mistake that wasn't actually critical and it wasn't kind of in your main duties, but it's something that was still relatively important and you learn from that experience. So all I want to hear when I ask this question is honesty. So someone actually admitting that they made a mistake. B, understanding the impact and assessing the impact of their mistake. And then C, what they actually did to rectify it and to actually solve the problem. Did they speak to a manager, to the client? Did they ask for help? Kind of what were the measures that they took to resolve that? And I think this is a question that, again, can present you in a really good light if you are prepared, but it can definitely cause a lot of panic and confusion if you're not prepared. Manage the complex project. Probably in sweaty palms, because I think a lot of people fail to explain the complexity of the project. So they often focus maybe on the technical complexity of why something needs to be done, and they go into so much detail. But oftentimes the complexity actually comes from the fact that there are many parties, many people involved. And so rather than going into super technical detail, I think it's important to talk about the people that were involved, how you communicated with each other, how did you resolve potential conflicts. So the complexity comes from the human side rather than the purely technical side. If you can combine both, that's even better. So I think this one is one that you need to be careful with. Why should we hire you over others? I would say this one is the call for backup, because I don't like this question. I don't like companies that actually ask this question, because I think they're kind of asking you to claim things about you, just like sell yourself. Not a huge fan of this one. But in case you get asked, I think in here it's important to emphasize what makes you different, and not necessarily focus super much on your work ethic and the fact that you would outwork every single person or anything like that. I think here is a good opportunity to highlight your achievements and how you feel that you can contribute to the company. It can be also about alignment in values, alignment with the mission of the company, anything that you can bring that showcases that you are similar with the company's values and mission can actually help you here. But in general, definitely have a think about that in case you get asked. Describe a time you failed. I think this is very similar to the making a mistake, but I think failure in here is much more of an idea that didn't work. Your proposal ended up not being accepted. The client changed their mind. You lost the client, things like that. So it's kind of bigger than a mistake. It's something just kind of more generally not working. So again, I think in here it's all about learning and reflection and showcasing that you understood why it actually didn't work out and how you changed it for later. So for example, I think one of the best approaches in here is to actually pick something from your early career if you can. And so for example, you can blame a lot of the failure on inexperience, on kind of lack of knowledge of the professional world. And then when you're answering that question, really kind of emphasize how since then you have learned a lot from that experience and you have not had any such failures. I think this is the smartest way to approach this one. Why are you looking for a new role? This one. I would definitely go for call for a backup on this one. I think a lot of hiring managers are really curious, but also they might just be a little bit like testing you whether you're going to talk shit about your previous employer. So I'm actually going to add this one as well in here because they're kind of similar. So this one might be if you're currently out of work, you're now unemployed, and this one is maybe if you're applying while you're still working. But I feel kind of they're similar. So I think the key in here is to be positive, like never badmouth a past employer. Like you can talk about that there was differences between how you saw the role and your responsibilities and the company's direction. You can talk about difference in values and what you have learned from that experience. But I think if you can, definitely focusing on more positive things. So for example, that you have reached kind of the ceiling of what you can do in this job and you're looking to go to the next level. You can talk about having completed a big project successfully and looking for a new challenge, anything like that that kind of emphasizes that you're not leaving or looking for a new job because you are bored and in a massive conflict with your current manager, even if that's the case. But it's much more about development, growth, new challenges, and kind of moving to the next step of your career. Whew. Conflict in the workplace. I would say this one is in the heart racing. So this situation might be framed in a few different ways. It might be about describing a time you had a conflict with someone and kind of how you resolved that, or how did you handle, for example, people on your team having a conflict. So depending on the position you're applying for, this might be a slightly different variation. But in here, it is so much about kind of communication, listening, empathy, adapting your priorities, and just kind of trying to find a compromise. And especially if it's more for a leadership position, I think it's very important to have an example prepared and talk through how you actually manage that conflict. How do you get people kind of on the same page, working together, even if they don't agree? So it's very much about leadership and management skills. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? I'll put this one in sweaty palms because I think for me, this is maybe not the easiest, but also not a very difficult question. I think this one, you just need to think about, okay, you probably can't answer the question, honestly, because who knows where the world's going to be in 5 years, right? So I think, in the last 5 years, the world changed tremendously, and I never imagined where I would be now, 5 years ago. But if it stands right now, my focus is to do ABC. So really, they're asking basically if you're planning to leave and do something completely different in the next couple of years, or are you actually devoted to that company if you get the job? Because hiring is expensive. And so no company wants people that are just going to come and stay for 6 months. And then because they really wanted to travel the world, they're going to leave. You may have that plan, but definitely this is not the time to share it. You want to show you're dedicated, you're enthusiastic, you're passionate about that job, and you really, really want it. And so kind of try to align your goals, your development plan. You can talk about wanting to progress to more of a leadership position, managerial position, expert position, if this is something that you're passionate about. So kind of try to showcase where you want to go in the next couple of years. And please know that no company is going to hold you accountable to that 5-year plan. So just say something that makes sense to you and feels truthful. How do you prioritize your work? Okay, this one I think is quite an easy question. I think in here, we just want to hear things around urgency and importance. So Eisenhower matrix, anything like that. You can talk about how you identify which task to focus on, how you plan your calendar, discussing things with your team or manager around priorities and aligning with the company's mission, anything like that. It's not a tricky question. Just make sure that you actually provide a detail on how you do it. So do you use any tools? Do you have like a checklist every week? Do you have a virtual calendar? What do you use? And how do you adapt when things don't go according to plan? What's the last thing you learned? Okay, this one is a very easy question because they don't care. This question is not about what you actually say. This is a chance for you to show your personality. Like if it's a very general question of what's the last thing you learned, you can talk about a book you read, documentary you watched, even a conversation you had or anything like that. So it's about the fact that you're proactive, curious, and you can kind of talk to other people, right? That's all that is. Now, if it's more of a tech interview, let's say, and I sometimes ask my candidates, what's the last thing you learned in terms of tech? Again, I don't really care what you tell me. You can tell me that you learned about AI or a new language or you played with a certain new platform. Genuinely, I don't care. What I care about is seeing and hearing your enthusiasm about learning. Because the last thing I want is someone that is completely not passionate, let's say, about tech, about the field, but they just like the salary and so they go into it. Because I used to be that person in engineering that it was just a job and I wasn't interested in it. And so I know that it's very, very hard to motivate yourself and kind of do great things. And so I want to hear people that have enthusiasm. So that's a very easy question. question, but just again, prepare something that you recently learned. Doesn't have to be the exact last thing you learned. All right, next one. Tell me about a time you found a better way to do something. That question can also be like, tell me about a time you influenced someone to do something in a different way. Tell me about a time you improved something or made a suggestion that was implemented. This is like a variant of that question. But where would I put it? Probably in sweaty palms. I think in here, the important part is talking about influence and how you convince other people. So it is number one, how you validated your idea. Like, did you go to like your manager and made a suggestion? Did you make a prototype and then you presented it? Did you kind of draw a graphic and try to kind of convince it with more commercial stats? Anything that you've done to explain why it was better, what was the previous inefficiency or problem, how you solved it, and why it was better. And then focus on the communication element of how you actually sold that idea. Because let's say if I'm hiring you for a tech role and you might be the best developer, but if you can't convey why your solution is better than what we're currently doing, and you can't influence anyone to change their mind, then of course, this is not great because you are not utilizing your skills properly. And so what we need to hear really is how you actually take an idea and then make sure that other people listen to you. Tell me about a time that you delivered feedback. Okay, so probably going to kart racing. This question is quite tough because you might not have had to ever do that. Especially if you're earlier in your career, you might not have had a chance to actually manage someone or even give negative feedback. And so in this case, it's quite challenging because you have to talk about what your approach is. And if you've had an opportunity to deliver negative feedback, it's so important to communicate how you actually delivered it so it didn't completely crush and demotivate the other person. And so it's all about kind of showcasing that you have empathy, that you know how to actually frame the feedback to be constructive and helpful, and even offering support to the person on the receiving end, maybe answering their questions, offering to help them. So again, try to turn this question into a positive and talk about how you've delivered that feedback, yes, but then how it actually helped the other person and what was the outcome. This one, I think we've already answered this. I'll just like put it in here because like it's literally the same question. I don't know why I have it twice. Manage multiple projects. This one, probably in here, like it's quite similar to how do you prioritize your work. And so it's all about time management and kind of how you distribute your tasks. Now, I think in here, in terms of prioritizing, it's a little bit more about the how you do it versus like managing multiple projects. I think it's asking even more about client communication within the team, delegation, maybe team meetings, and kind of how you communicate progress. And so again, it's about kind of figuring out how you balance your workload and how you manage to make sure that nothing is actually left behind. What's your preferred work environment? I would say this is an easy peasy lemon squeezy question because anyone should be able to answer that. The only thing to just make sure that you know is what is the working environment in the company. So for example, if they're all in person, don't say that you work the best remotely with no distractions and no people around, because then they're gonna wonder if you're actually gonna fit within the team. Or on the other hand, if you're someone that absolutely loves kind of office socializing and gossip and watercolor chats, and they're a fully remote company, again, that might not fit very well. So think about kind of like work environment in terms of remote versus in-person or hybrid. You can think about working individually or as part of a team. Just make sure that what you're saying is not contradicting with the job description and the actual role. How do you deal with challenge at work? This one is quite an easy one. Like, we've all had challenges, and I think that's the most important part, that you can pick literally any challenge. So you can think about a process that wasn't working, a bug you had to fix, client changed their mind. There's so many situations. And I think in here it's really important to explain what the challenge was. I think most people don't go into enough detail of the context, and so they just go into solution mode and what they did, but they don't actually explain why it was important that this was solved. What would happen if you didn't resolve this, right? So just make sure that you go into enough detail to explain the challenge and its importance before you dive into the actions and the results. Why do you want to work here? I think this one is probably in the sweaty palms category. I think that it is very, very much doable, but you need to prepare. And I have an entire video that is all about how to answer this question. But in a nutshell, you need to show kind of motivation and alignment with the company as a whole. You need to explain why you want to be part of this team or have this role. And so there is quite a few things to make sure that you mention and demonstrate that you've done your research and you understand the company. Because we never want someone who is thinking that this is just a job, okay? Now, like maybe if you work in McDonald's and you're like, okay, I just need to pay my bills and that's why I want it. But even McDonald's would still want people that maybe enjoy fast food and they want to actually work in this role. And so I think in this one, just make sure that you've done enough research, you know who you're interviewing with, and you can demonstrate your motivation and passion for doing the specific job. How do you stay motivated, or what motivates you? These are very similar questions. I would go into sweaty palms, to be honest, because I think this question seems super, super simple, but actually a lot of people fail to answer it in a way that I think this question is asking for. There are two different types of motivation. There is intrinsic motivation. This is a sort of like we're self-motivated. And then there is also extrinsic motivation. And so that's the motivation when it's like external things like money and status and perks and things like that, right? A lot of people, when they answer this question, they will either go purely on, well, I'm really motivated because I like a challenge, I like to learn, blah, blah, blah. And so they talk only about what the job is going to give them, and that's what motivates them. But they don't talk about any sort of things like client satisfaction and seeing your project out and helping people, which is very much extrinsic, right? Or people talk about the perks of the job and kind of what it's going to give them, which again is very much, it's going to give me this and this and that, but I'm not going to give anything. So what you want to do is actually combine some intrinsic and extrinsic motivators in here and make sure that it's actually personable. And I actually have a video that's going to teach you kind of 20 different motivating factors that you can use to answer that question. So it's still authentic and personal to you, but also mentions both of those elements. What's your biggest strength? I think this one is in the easy peasy lemon squeezy. I have an entire video on how to structure your answer, but this one is a great opportunity to showcase your strength, your skills, your achievement, and I think is a really great conversation starter because all it wants and asks for you is to just have a little bit of self-awareness and confidence to actually talk about the work you've done. Tell me about yourself. I would actually put this one in the sweaty palms, even though it's such a simple question. But I think that, again, people either launch into a monologue and talk for like 10 minutes about themselves, or they're so brief that they don't even tell the essential things about themselves. And so there is, again, a strategy for how to talk about yourself for about like a minute, minute and a half. And the goal here is to just bring the person on the other side on the same page. Because truth is, they probably haven't had time to read your entire CV and they're asking you to give them a bit of context before they go into the full interview. So there is a method to the madness for this question, so check out my video on that. Okay, so what's your biggest weakness? I would still put this one in the sweaty palms, I think, because a lot of people are really worried about this question. And I genuinely think this question is not that difficult, but you need to know the structure of how to approach it and how to answer it in a way that still presents you in a good light. So we don't want to say things like, oh, I'm a perfectionist, like everyone uses that. So there is an entire video on the channel all about how to answer this question with some specific examples that you can use. And finally, what salary you're looking for? I will put that at call for back, okay? Because I think that this is quite a challenging question, especially when the salary is listed as competitive, so they've not disclosed anything. This question requires you to have some negotiation skills, to ask some questions, to have confidence. So I genuinely think you need to be prepared for this one, and you need to have a strategy for how you can handle those negotiations. Alrighty, y'all. So that was quite challenging, to be honest, but I hope you can see that the only questions I've put at the call for backup are those very kind of confrontational questions, almost those very challenging ones. The heart racing ones are all about you doing poorly or delivering negative feedback or falling behind. I think this is kind of the heart racing stuff because there is a potential to present yourself in negative light. The sweaty palms is, I think, questions that seem easy, but a lot of people get wrong because they haven't fully thought about them and they maybe not have a structure for how to answer them. I think the brain busters are quite simple. It's just think about it, prepare and answer. That's it. There's not that much thinking involved. And I think the easy peasy lemon squeezy are the questions that are quite positive. Generally can't go wrong. Just being a little bit strategic can really, really help. All right. So let me know in the comments, which of those questions do you find the most stressful, the most challenging? And if there was a specific question that you weren't sure how to answer, go and check my playlist with the common interview questions and specific strategies for each and every one of them. In my videos, I'll give you so many examples so that you can never fail your interview again. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and share the video with someone that might need it, because my mission is to make sure that everyone wakes up happy on Mondays. And I think the best way to do that is to make you better at interviews so you have the choice of which job you want to take. I'll see you in the next video.